Uh, Hello everyone, welcome to the first instalment of the EAP Club Senior Interview. Today we have the one and only Charlotte, who is graduating this semester. The goal of this series is to interview seniors who are going to be graduating and learn a bit about them, learn about their path, where they're going to go, learn about their journey as an EAPster and how they reflected about their growth and where they are now compared to where they were at Honours Academy or where they were even a year ago. And it's a two-sided event, really. The first is to get to know people who we haven't talked to in quite a while. Those moments in the kitchen when you'd mention, "Oh, what are you going to do?" and they said, "Oh, I'm going to do this." We haven't had those for quite a while. So it's to provide a bridge like that. And the second thing is also to perhaps provide a guide if you wish to follow in the footsteps. Follow the same degree, the same plan regarding graduate school or graduate programs. You can learn a bit about it there. So, alright, if we could start off, can you just introduce yourself, your major, and when you'll be graduating?
Sure. So I'm Charlotte. I'm a biochemistry major. I used to be a biology major, but then I switched. And I'm graduating this semester, spring 2021, I guess.
Very nice. I think this could be very, very useful for lots of people who are looking to go into graduate programs regarding biochemistry, biology, and the chemistry-related fields. But to start off, I want to know a bit more about you as a person, rather than your academic achievements. So I suppose we should start off with just where your parents from, where are you from, what do you identify as, sort of nationality, ethnic background, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So my parents are both from Syracuse, New York, which is in the middle of the state of New York, sort of. And then I was born in Pasadena, and I've lived there my whole life. So I think, yeah.
When did that migration happen over from New York? What was the reasoning?
My mom got a full scholarship to USC for music, and so she moved out here to study violin performance at USC. And LA is a pretty good place to be in the entertainment industry, and so she stayed. And then at some point, my dad followed her out here. I'm not entirely sure when that happened because obviously I wasn't there.
Fair enough. Yeah, that would make sense. So before the interview, we were talking about how later on today you have to do some violin recordings. How do you feel like that? I assume that relationship with the violin has come through the bloodlines from your mother. How has that sort of impacted your, I guess we can say, your schooling, your life? How has that played a role?
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing violin for 14 years, so it's been a pretty big part of my life, I would say. My mom was my teacher for the first 6 years, and it was interesting, but it was kind of difficult because she had to work, obviously, and so she couldn't be as consistent as she would have liked to be. So I switched teachers in 6th grade.
Okay.
And I mean, it's been really nice, especially since I've joined EAP, because it's like a stress relief thing. It's something that I can do that's just totally unrelated to school.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk big, but I did piano for 3 years, so talking to a master here certainly. And many talk about how playing music, learning an instrument has a positive effect on academics, on mental acuity, things like that. Do you find that? Do you find that you are a super genius after learning the instrument, or how do you feel?
I think so. Music has got. I think one of the big things is that it teaches you how to sort of continue to work hard at something day in and day out, and I think all instruments, but especially violin, because you don't have keys or frets, and so intonation is such a big thing, and the only way to really get good at that, especially if you don't have perfect pitch like I don't, is to just practice. And so I think that just that being able to motivate yourself to do something even though you don't want to do it at all, that I think that has helped. I don't know if I would go so far as to say that it turns you into a genius or anything like that, though.
I mean, that's an interesting angle. I haven't really considered it from that line before, that you can view picking up an instrument as this sort of task of endurance, to tell yourself, I'm going to work to get better at this thing, even if at the moment I would rather not be practicing and things like that. It's very cool. So, I guess in terms of your childhood and growing up and things like that with the violin and with, I also I don't know if you're still doing this, but I was when you did my EAP tour back 3-4 years ago.
I remember that.
Yes, you mentioned that you were a swimmer, I believe. Have you kept on doing that? I know you were talking about how you had some early wake-ups of practice and things like that, and I wonder if you continue to do that as well.
Yeah, I was able to continue doing that until the pandemic hit, and then it's been hard because I was on a team, and they are still practicing, but they practice in La Mirada, so I would be spending about twice as much time driving as swimming, and so I'm sort of taking a break from that until they can find a place that's slightly closer to where I live to practice, but I do miss it a lot.
Yeah. That's something interesting as well. I mean, for me, at least, if we talk about violin for endurance and about, training parts of yourself that you feel like you might be neglecting through other methods, waking up early and having that motivation at the start of the day has always been a big issue for me. And I understand that for you, swimming, and for most people who I've talked to who have had swimming, it's been a very early rise sort of thing. Did that come easy, natural for you, or is that something that you had to sort of force yourself into?
I generally do wake up on the earlier side, but most of the swimming that I was able to do would be in the evening. There was one semester where I had to do it Saturday mornings from like 7:15 to 10:30, but that was a long practice, and there were other problems with that. But so mostly it was actually in the evenings, and so
I see.
like in spring 2020, I would do shadowing from 7 to 11 in the morning, and then I would do swimming from 4:30 to 7 in the evening, and yeah, it was a lot.
Very nice. Well, there are two things I want to go from that jump point, and I guess the first thing is so you discussed how obviously the pandemic and all that has certainly impacted your swimming, which cutting out that sort of exercise, at least for me. I mean, I know for definitely not in the team environment. I mean, I used to play club soccer, but in the university setting, I played volleyball in classes and things like that, and so not being able to do that kind of sucks because like. Not only do you lose out on the team aspect, but you lose out on the actual physical exercise, really, because, at least for me, not quite as motivated to do, like, sit-ups in the corner of my bedroom, rather as compared to, playing volleyball with friends and teammates. So how, in other ways of your life, has the pandemic affected you? Like in university or just in day-to-day motivation, inspiration, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, right, I'm in a research lab, and I've been in the research lab for about 2 years now. And since campus is closed, nobody has allowed into the lab. And that's been a struggle, I think.
I think we are having a bit of internet issues.
Yeah.
It could be from my end. I'm not
Or
sure.
it could be from mine, I don't know.
All right, I think we're back. So you said you're in a lab for 2 years, and then I think you cut out a bit from there.
Okay, yeah. And then because of the pandemic, Cal State LA has closed all labs except for, to some extent, graduate students. And so I think that's been the biggest thing that I've lost. And then also, I'm pre-med, so I was volunteering at a hospital and shadowing doctors at another hospital. And obviously, hospitals are not really high up on the list of places you want to be.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I think. Have you felt though that the pandemic has affected you more so on like an internal scale rather than just cancelling external activities?
Really, as it's gone on, I've noticed like my motivation has declined. At the beginning of the pandemic, I saw it as like, oh, I don't have to do all this stuff that I used to spend like 15 hours a day at school doing. Yeah. I can, take a break, do other things and stuff. But then as it's gone on, it's just become quite demotivating, I think.
Yeah, certainly can agree with that one. I think for me at least, if I may just butt in, I think the pandemic has been one of those things where very, very similar, at least for me, to the idea of like team sports. I used to think of like the main campus, the main walkway, as like a team academic area, right? You have lots of people around you that are all doing work, and you're like, well, okay, I guess I have to do work now, either to like look productive, and then you end up being productive, or just like be in this productive space. So certainly interesting to see those areas of our lives removed. So you mentioned you've been in a lab. How did you get into that lab? I know there's lots of people who want to get into labs but don't know how or feel like awkward. So how did you get in, I guess?
I was actually in two labs. I switched labs in my third year. So the first lab, basically all you really need to do at Cal State LA, it's quite, professors are generally very encouraging to students who want to do research. So if you just send a professor an email and say, hello, I'm interested in your research on this subject because of this reason, and, you know, especially if you read one of their papers, they're if they have room in their lab for you, they'll generally be happy to meet you. But the first lab was a biology lab, and it was very interesting. But in my third year, I took organic chemistry and just totally fell in love with it. And so in the spring of that year, I asked my organic chemistry professor if I could join his lab, and he said yes. And it's been really fun.
Very, very cool. I think it takes a lot of bravery to switch paths like that. I mean, I know it's not. It's quite the decision, right? You've been in this lab and you've become accustomed to it and accustomed to the goal of the lab and the lab mates and things like that. But it's certainly cool to see how a love for a different field sort of say along that way. So, what do you feel like gave you the bravery to make that switch? Because that's quite a choice, right? It's quite a leap to decide to up and leave a lab, you know.
Yeah, it was a sort of a spur of the moment decision because I had heard that someone else in our class was also switching labs, and I wasn't actually sure whether or not you could switch labs, like whether that was something that was done. And so to see that this other person was doing it as well sort of gave me like the extra push to switch labs. And the transition, it was kind of difficult going into this environment where, you know, I didn't really know what they were doing and I had a lot that I had to learn and I had to learn it kind of quickly. But it was really worth it as I started to, you know, understand the project more and take more of a lead in the project and start training other members. That was fun. And then everything closed.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So OChem. Well, what's so fun about OChem?
I like the logic of it because like what you're doing is you're watching where the electrons go and you're sort of like drawing out the path of where they go and where they want to go, and I just think it's really fun. And then plus you get to like draw the molecules, and that's fun too.
Very nice. Logic and art all in one, I suppose.
Yep.
I think one thing that I wanted to quickly touch on from our earlier discussion about sort of the activities you've lost and things like that is the shadowing. So I've heard a lot from friends who are in biochem, biology, chemistry about wanting opportunities to experience what it's like to go into a medical field or a medical profession. What role has shadowing played? Has it said to you, oh no, I don't want to be that. That's not what I want to do. Has it been like, oh wow, this is awesome? What do you think?
I think, you know, the shadowing program has been really cool, and I think that's one of the big benefits of EAP because that program was created through the parent of an EAP student who realized that there's not really that many opportunities for people under 18 to get experience in the healthcare field. And so it's really cool. I would recommend it to anyone who's able to do it. Obviously, not right now, but when things get back to normal. And it was just like, it did, some of the places that I shadowed, like the OR, it was like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. This is amazing. And then there were some places where, you know, I would think, like, I also shadowed in the ER for a while. And it's very chaotic there, and there's a lot going on all at once. And it sort of showed me that kind of environment is not exactly where I'd like to work, although the people who do work there are amazing and deserve, you know, all of the respect and all of that stuff. But it was good because it sort of gave me more direction in where I wanted to go.
I suppose that's an interesting balance because so for me, it's a little bit off track certainly, but for me there's always been lots of different career paths in my mind. There's been, theoretical mathematician, pure mathematician, probably not the one, but lots of different paths. But one of them has always been like in the back of my mind, even though I don't cook at all, the idea of being a chef is a very, very interesting idea. The idea of being a chef in a functional environment is not a good idea. And I think that's one of the interesting balances that with the ER specifically, you have that stress and that speed and that intensity of work, but there is also that immediacy of care right? You are saving people, you are helping people instantly, and that must be a difficult moral decision to make if you're wanting to go into the medical field.
Yeah, I mean, I think because in the medical field there's so many different options, so I think it's definitely possible for people to figure out which one suits them the best if they want to go into that field. And I'm not entirely sure yet either. Mostly waiting till medical school to figure that out.
Fair enough. So has there been a moment where you could say, okay, that was the moment that I decided that I was going to go in the biochem field, or I was going to go in the specific biochem field that you're in now?
I switched majors to biochemistry roughly when I changed labs. So it was sort of like a moving more towards the chemical side of science without totally giving up on the biology side, because I do find the biology side very interesting as well. And so it wasn't really a moment, like a one moment. It was sort of something that I'd been thinking about for a while, and then I kept putting off making the appointment because, it sounded like that would be annoying to do, and it wasn't, but.
Yeah. So if I'm a student and I want to switch majors, fortunately in your case, biology and chemistry have a major that has the two together, and so you can make the decision to not leave behind that part of you all entirely. Would you recommend that students who want, like, let's say I want to go to engineering, right? Well, engineering is a bad example. Let's say I want to go to psychology, right? Mathematics to psychology. Would you say that I should still keep behind that side of mathematics to me, like in a minor or something like that? So how would you recommend someone bridge that if they like mathematics a little bit but really want to go into a different field?
I mean, I would tell them that I would probably just ask them, like, are you ready to leave mathematics behind entirely? And, if not, would you be okay just like taking a few classes for fun, or would you want more of a structured, set of classes? And then that would be probably a minor.
Yeah.
But I think that's an individual decision.
Yeah, certainly. I think for me, at least, changing majors has always been the scary part, most scary part of EAP, at least for me, is this idea that I have to know what I'm doing. And so it takes a lot of bravery to make switches, but certainly very cool to see, nonetheless. So I guess one thing I want to say on the topic of taking classes for fun and taking classes for your own advancement, maybe perhaps instead of a degree, I've heard lots of people talk about the MCAT as this like big demon, right? And the MCAT has lots of sides to it. I think I'm fairly confident it has like different facets to it.
It does.
How have you managed to tackle that? Do you take classes just for fun because you think they'll help you for the MCAT, or what? How have you been preparing for that, even in the undergraduate stage?
Yeah, so I took the MCAT back in January, so this is something that I'm quite.
Oh, I was not aware of this.
It was quite a big part of my life for the entirety of fall semester. I think so. Obviously, there are certain classes that you do have to take for medical school, and those do help you on the MCAT. So I think the advice for people in those classes would be, as tempting as it is to just forget everything after the final, to the extent that you're able to do that, don't.
Yeah.
And then there's another section that people who are pre-med will know about. It's called the CARS section, which is critical analysis and reasoning skills. And it's like, it's not really reading comprehension, but it's like, can you read a passage and say, like, if this piece of evidence was included, how would that affect the author's conclusion? And so it's a lot of questions like that. And I think for that question, what helped me is that I read a lot on my own time. And so I think that sort of helped me get used to reading passages and thinking about them. And I think that helped me do well on that section.
I think I think big exams that dictate graduate programs are quite common, right, in the academia world that we face. You have your GRE for certain graduate schools. You have your LSAT, your MCATs, and all things that end in ATs and things like that, right? I want to ask, though, I think for me, at least, in my math classes, I've always wanted to be the person that keeps information, retains it, and then like, oh, yes. Oh, my analysis class from 3 semesters ago, yes, well, this theorem tells you this. Of course, I want to be that, but I struggle a lot. It's one of my main issues, I suppose, with my learning journey has been the fact that it feels like after every class, like a clean slate. It's like, okay, I did well on the final, and now I just don't retain the information. So what sort of steps do you recommend for someone who wishes to retain that information?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the greatest at it either. I would say one thing that helps is if you can tutor other people in that class. Like, I'm tutoring someone in organic chemistry right now. And, and plus, if you really, really like the class, it might come back faster. So, like, I don't think it's going to be at the front of your mind 24/7 after you've taken the class. But it's just like, as one of my professors would say, it's like, if you looked at your notes 5 years from now, would you be able to figure out what you were talking about?
That's a good point. So do you write notes with that in mind? You're thinking like, oh, I need to make this clear and not be like, oh, part A equals heart, right, or something like that.
I do, after I take a class, I do copy the notes into a nicer notebook, and I'll generally write out abbreviations and stuff, and I'll be more careful then. And I usually use those when I'm like studying for tests and stuff. So I do think about it a little bit, but probably not as much as I should.
That's a cool idea. I have not done the rewriting notes technique partially because that takes time.
It does take time.
Yeah, that is a very interesting idea. Definitely, it'd be very cool if you're in medical school and you have some like sort of bridge, a prerequisite, and you're like, oh, that class existed, I forgot about that. Might be useful to look back to a notebook or something like that. That is that class. You can just scan through it. That is super cool. So, on a similar line to music, you mentioned reading. Right, reading, very, I think, an integral part of people. And for other people, they want that to be an integral part of them. And I wonder, I think for me, I empathize, I think, because I have the experience that reading for me has been a test of endurance more than fun, in all honesty. Because I play video games, and I was talking to some friends about this, how there's lots of hobbies that give you stimulus, and you're like, I can do this, and I know it'll be fun instantly, right? I watch a TV show that's entertaining. I can play video games that are entertaining right off the bat. But for at least for me, and I've talked to others, and they feel this way too, reading's more of a slow burn, right? You sort of take the time, immerse yourself in the world, and sort of build towards those moments of intense stimulus. And I suppose then, as a reader, what sort of benefits have you derived from reading that you would say supersede the sort of, I could just be playing video games instead?
I think the biggest thing that I've gotten out of reading is it sort of like it gives you an opportunity to see the world in a slightly different way, and like each book can I'll only really like a book if it sort of changes the way that I think about or look at the world, and I think that can only I don't want to say only, but I think the main way that happens is if you take that time to read the and sort of and about it. That I think I'm frozen. Am I frozen?
I think so. Maybe.
Yeah.
Come back.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Back?
I'll let you know when you're back. You're back now.
Okay.
You cut out at like different perspectives on the world.
Yeah, and so that's really what makes me like a book, is if it makes me think about the world in a slightly different way, and I think you need to be able to take the time that reading sort of forces you to take to be able to think and to be able to sort of catch that. But, I mean, some books definitely are more endurance than others. Although there are, short, funny books, and I've read a few of those, and those are good.
Very interesting. I think, the issue of learning about the world, thinking about the world in a different way, and being challenged, I think is very critical to a lot of our journeys as students, and also especially as students who have been told that they're like geniuses and smart and the best of all time at like pretty much all periods of our life. It'll be very easy for us to live a life where we're not challenged. Right, we can just take classes that we know we'll get A's in, or we can take even hard classes and just apply ourselves just a little bit enough to get the A and then call it a day. And with reading as well, it's like, you can read things that will say things you already know about the world because you sort of have that intuition, things like that. And so I think for me, and I think for lots of people, this challenge is what we need. Right? We need to be challenged. We don't want to live in echo chambers and things like that. I think for me, in regards to reading, I've recently, not recently, but one of the authors who, in this stage of my life, as like a late teenager, who has been affecting me the most is Camus. He's a French writer, Albert Camus. I think Albert. And he talks a lot about sort of the way he writes is very important to me, because my general philosophy about life is like I would much rather know. I guess it sort of is a good idea for this interview, but I'd sort of rather know why somebody chooses X brand over Y brand of like random product than their goals and aspirations for general life and happiness and all that sort of stuff. Because I feel like you get to know people about with the minutiae about life and things like that a lot more. And that's sort of the way he writes. He writes a lot of minutiae. One of his books, The Plague, is about a fictional plague in a town, and it's freakishly relevant to the COVID times about masks and social distancing, all this stuff. And it was written in, I think, 1940s, maybe the 50s, something like that. And I do agree. I think challenge is one of the most important aspects of life in general, and I can see how reading can provide that. You mentioned in the form that you provided that you've been reading Kant at the moment.
I finished it actually a few weeks ago.
How has that been? How have you? How would that book affect you? How have other authors affected you? Things like that.
I mean that book was an endurance.
Okay.
A test of endurance. I think my edition was 668 pages, and he is not an easy writer to read.
Mm-hmm.
He likes very long sentences.
Okay.
I had a friend who tried to listen to the audiobook of The Critique of Pure Reason, and he said he had to rewind it like every 10 seconds just to see. Because the thing is, by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you forget how it began.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it was a very interesting book, and I'm still working out what I got out of it, and I'm not going to try to summarize it because I'm going to leave something out.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So that's been a big accomplishment, I think, this year. But then there's other books that are shorter and easier. Like I read a book that's by someone named Mary Roach, and it's about what happens. Like it's about like the science of space, but like again, like you were saying, like from the very minutiae, or the very minute side of things. So it's like you know, if you're in space, what happened before they put showers on spaceships? And they tested what happens if you put people in a tiny capsule and don't wash them for 2 weeks. And so she describes that in great detail, and lots of other things like that. And it's just a very interesting book, although if you're squeamish, don't read it.
Fair enough. Have there been authors along the way that you can say, oh, I credit this person for a lot of my character or moral development, things like that?
That's a very good question. No specific authors come to mind. I think if I went back and I keep a list of the books that I've read in the past since 2019, and so I think if I had went back to that list, I would find some things for you, but I don't have that with me right now.
Now, do you write that list? So I've tried doing that. There's a little book up there. I think it's the one. It's one of those. There's a small little leather book that I write down what I wrote and a little bit of summary of what I enjoyed and stuff. I write that mostly of like a little self-indulgent, like, haha, look at all these books that I've read. It's like a little achievement list. But do you think that you will, when you're old and grey, look back on the list and be like, oh, hey, that book?
So I've got a couple of different lists in there. For like one of them, I just have the book and the author, and that's sort of just an achievement thing because it's a numbered list, so I can see how many books I read like each year. I start it over each year. And then I have another list where I write short summaries of the books, and that's mostly just because you know how when you read a book and you're thinking about it and you're having potentially interesting or at least interesting to you thoughts about the book, and then a month later you've totally forgotten all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh yeah, I kind of remember this book. I remember it being good, and I remember I thought it was interesting, but you can't really be more specific. And this is mostly just to try to prevent that.
I see. That makes sense. So, I think we will leave roughly about 15 minutes. I assume we're supposed to do this from 2 to 3. Seems like a decent chunk. So, we'll go to 2:45, which is about 10 more minutes, and then see if the audience has any questions. If not, we can just keep chatting about things. I want to take it in a little bit of a different, more serious note, I guess. I think definitely there's been a lot of things to be very, very useful to people who want to go into the MCAT path. But I wrote this question, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a wholesome question, so I'm going to ask it. So how would the Charlotte of the Honours Academy be proud of the Charlotte we see today?
I think she would like. I think I've gained a certain amount of confidence in myself and like my ideas and stuff like that. And I think mostly that's come from being in a lab and, you know, the support and encouragement I've gotten there. But I think she would be proud and probably a bit surprised by that. Like by the fact that I'm even doing this, because the Charlotte Monsour Academy probably would not have signed up for this interview.
That's very cool. Confidence is a very interesting thing, right? There are people who gain confidence through achievement, right? They're like, oh, I'm the god above all, I've got A's on everything, and I've never failed, and all this thing. And that confidence can oftentimes be quite blinding to people around them. But oftentimes I think the strongest confidence is that which is grown through failure and humility, I suppose. Learning to just, you know, take it and just be like, okay, all right, let's go. We quickly have a question from Ryan. Asks if you can repeat the author of the book.
Which book?
Well, we mentioned 3 authors, so you could mention your 2 and I'll mention my 1 and we'll see if we cover it.
Okay, so there was the book about space that was Mary Roach, and I think it was called Packing for Mars, The Curious Science of Life in the Void. She's written some other books. I've read one of them. It's about cadavers, and that's good. And then there's Immanuel Kant, The Critique of Pure Reason. And Kant is Kant, so those are my 2.
And I was talking about, I believe, Albert, Camus, Kamus. Okay, so, confidence, right? Confidence sometimes it comes from lots of achievement, being good at things, but I feel like the strong, true, and pure version of confidence comes from taking the losses and growing from them. So I suppose I should ask, have there been, if you don't want to share, it's completely fine, but have there been moments in your life, well, not your life, but in your academic journey, where you've reached a point of failure and had to grow from it?
I don't know that failure would be the exact word to describe it, but when I first joined the lab that I'm currently in, I didn't know anything about what they were doing. We study singlet oxygen. I had no idea what that was or how it's different from, you know, the oxygen that we breathe or anything. And there were, I think, some expectations that I learn all of this stuff and I learn it quickly because the person who was training me was graduating at the end of the semester. And and I later found out that basically the entire lab would be graduating at the end of the semester and be getting a bunch of new people. And so I think that was probably the biggest struggle, was just to try to learn this information and learn how to think in a more scientific way than I had been asked to before and things like that. And so I think, and I was definitely quite overwhelmed at first. But the person who was training me was very, very nice and was quite helpful. And the professor who runs the lab was also very, very nice and quite helpful. And so I think over time, I got to see that I was improving. And since I knew, because normally, you know, I don't know if you experience this, but, you know, when you do something well, you think, well, okay, but like that wasn't, like anyone probably could have done it if they had wanted to. And so for me to see myself go from this person who like had no idea what they were doing and, you know, was like, you know, shaking and like spilling stuff and all this stuff, and then to go from that to training new people and, you know, telling them that it's okay if they are shaking or spilling stuff. Like, it was something that I was able to tangibly see, like, okay, you did do this. And that I think that helped. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I mean, I think it certainly does. Because I think it's interesting with a group of high achieving students, I guess we should say, students in the E program who, on average, do very well in classes. It's very interesting when we tackle ideas of like failure or feeling like you don't deserve your position or you're not knowing what you're doing, you shouldn't be there. Well, there's all the talks about imposter syndrome, all those things, and that exists, certainly. What would you say to I guess let's say there's two students. One, let's say they're Eepsters, just provide that relevancy. One of them just failed, literally just failed one of their classes, and the other one has never failed ever, and is struggling with feelings of like, I haven't really experienced failure. I don't know what it's going to be like when I hit that brick wall. What would you say to, let's say, student A first, who've just failed the class and is feeling like they don't deserve to be in the program?
I'd say you did get in, right? I was having a conversation kind of like this with my mom, like, because she's a musician, and so she worries, at a concert, like, what are they going to think? Is she going to mess up? All of that stuff. But then she remembers, you already auditioned or applied or whatever. You already got in. So they thought you were good enough to do that. And then regarding the failure, I would say, there are very few things that you really, really can't move past or, reverse. And I don't think that failing a class is one of those things that's, forever. Like, you can retake the class, I think.
Yeah.
And, you can work harder. And then, and also, you failed and you're still alive. Like, it didn't kill you. Because I think that's another thing that we are afraid of. Like, we're afraid that if we fail, like, the world as we know it will cease to exist. And so I'd say, well, now you know that it won't, and that you can move past this and you can move through it, and it'll be okay.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I think this might feel a bit of a less serious thing to bring up, but this is an interesting thing. So I think, hopefully. So volleyball, I'm sure you're familiar with like manga and anime and things like that, right?
Not really.
Well, okay, well, you know what they are, at least, down to definition.
Vaguely.
So anime, Japanese animation,
Yeah.
and manga is the actual like comics that get published each week. And so there's a manga / anime called Haikyuu, which is the direct ancient Japanese translation for volleyball. Otherwise, it would just be like borubo because it's a Western thing, and you see. But Haikyuu is, I believe, the direct reading of the kanji. And in Haikyuu, there is a character called Shinsuke Kita, and he's someone who he plays volleyball just like everyone else. He's got dyed hair. He's one of the characters, but he's very much focused on the process, right? The process of doing things and like cleaning up every morning, cleaning his room, doing this, getting that done, being very methodical and finding joy in the process. And there's a big championship game between him and the main team of the series, and he's there, and all of his other teammates are super nervous. They're scared for what's going to happen, and he looks at all of them, and he's actually bewildered. And he says, "I don't see the point of being nervous. I practiced so much to be here. I'm just going to do what I practiced." And that's been something that I take to heart, at least if I come to moments of failure. Like recently, I would share a failure of mine. Completely forgot to submit an assignment. Completely forgot. Got a complete goose egg on the assignment. Sucks, and there's something I have to deal with. And there are moments like that where you just go, what in the world? Like, that's not who I am, that's not my academic standards, that's something you have to deal with. I think you got frozen at smiling at my failure. But you're back down. But yeah, so that happens, and that's what you have to deal with. And so I think it's very interesting. I've had a specific friend of mine, won't name names at all, obviously, but who has experienced failure that I haven't. And at times, I think this is something that I feel like maybe you can take as condescending, but I mean it with all honesty. There are times when I feel actually I wish that I had experienced that failure, because I feel like that provides an opening to growth that may not be experienced if you just have that baseline of just A's the whole time. And I guess on that topic of getting A's all the time, how would you discuss, or how do you feel about growth and confidence upon the baseline of just getting A's, right? Oftentimes that's associated with perfectionism, and just, you only care about getting A's, if you get it's like toxic, right? If you get a B, it's like a negative thing. How do you tackle confidence, perfectionism, things like that?
I think that's something that I'm still working on. I know in organic chemistry, it was my favorite class, so I didn't just want to get an A, I wanted to get a perfect score on every single assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed 2 points on midterm 1 in OChem 1, and then I missed 3 points on the final in OChem 2. Then I've taken a few other classes with this professor, and I was never able to do it. And, like, I don't think I'm the best person to be talking about this because I think I still struggle with that to some extent.
I think it's interesting, though. I think we can still certainly have a productive conversation about it, because I think perfectionism is very interesting. I was talking about this with the previous EP graduate, Santina, a few nights ago, and we were talking about how I believe that perfectionism at its core, in its essence, is not a negative thing. Right? Wanting to do well, wanting to get 100%, being like, oh man, I missed these points, yeah, I definitely want to do better next time. All those things, obviously, I think, in what they produce, and in the essence, are positive. Yet very easily, and that's the tricky thing, very easily it could develop into something negative. Not rewarding yourself for things you've done right, maybe even in a more negative way, looking down on others who didn't do so well, looking down on yourself when you still did well, but not as well as you wanted, all these things. How do you combat the negative sides of it? How do you make sure you're rewarding yourself, make sure you're all good? How do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to the positive side of perfection, I think for the most part, what I had in organic chemistry was positive, and I think a big reason is because the people that I had around me, the professor, he knew about this, and my friends in the class, they knew that this was my goal, and they were like, you do realize you're going to get an A either way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they would sort of remind me that, just because it's not perfect. And so I think it's important to have a group of supportive people around you who are, maybe willing to celebrate your success even when you're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very, very valuable. How have you managed to sort of maintain that friend network and that support through the digital era we live in right now? I'm not saying the digital era is in the 2000s. I'm saying the COVID times right now.
Yeah. And I think you do have to be a lot more intentional about it.
Yeah.
So I think it has been a bit harder, but I do try to make the time to maintain the friendships that I want to maintain. So I'll have Zoom meetings with some of my friends. We'll just chat.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have one friend from my middle school who lives nearby, and so we go on walks basically every other week as that's just what we do. And then those are the main things, I think.
Very, very cool. I think for me the intentionality is very interesting, because I cannot put into words to express how much I sort of miss just sort of going into the kitchen, seeing some random person sitting down next to them, just saying some random thing, getting a conversation going, just talking about something. Whether it be like, oh my god, you won't believe what happened at Union today, or this midterm came back and I can't believe that he graded my answer like this. Just things like that, right? Yeah. Just things you can rely on, where instead it's like, hello, person I haven't talked to for 2 years. I know you were reading this messenger chat and are probably quite confused as to why I've reached out, but I just wanted to say hey. And it's like that. There's that intentionality aspect that's like, am I going to look weird? Is it cringe? All these things. And it's challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I think for that, though, the thing to remember, if someone you hadn't talked to in 2 years sent you a random message, would you be confused, or would you just be like, oh my gosh, it's so cool to hear from this person. I haven't heard from them in such a long time. I wonder how they're doing.
That is certainly cool.
So and I think that's probably, especially with an Eve, I think that's most people. I think if you just, reach out, I think most people would be happy to check in.
And
but it's hard to do.
It is hard. It's hard to summon the courage. It's hard not to fall into old ways of just the friend group you already have, right? For me, at least, I have the gaming group that I just sort of join in, and it's fine.
Yeah.
So I guess to finish off, maybe on a negative note, maybe on a positive note, do you think that EAP was the right choice for you? Do you think that this whole experience was what you should have done? Do you feel like maybe you should have gone to high school, done Khan Academy, APs? What do you think?
Yeah, I I mean, on a very, very light note, I think EAP was good because if I had done high school, I would have had to start college online, and no,
Very true.
because I would have graduated high school in 2020 and started college in 2021 school
Yeah, it
year.
doesn't seem
And
like a
so,
great time to be doing your like all your applications
no,
and all that stuff. Yeah,
no,
certainly not.
yeah. So like, but then on the more deeper way that you probably intended the question, I'm definitely glad that I did EAP and I would do it again. I think it's been a really good decision. So.
Are there? I suppose so. This video. I mean, well, not this interview like in whole, but like snippets of this we are going to be sharing with the Honors Academy students. I suppose there's the question. It's like, oh, what would you advise the Honors Academy students? And like everyone says, like, oh, manage your time. You know, trust in yourself. You know, all that stuff. And I think that's very important. But I do think that will come along the way. So I don't think I need to ask you for that now. I suppose what I should ask is, what would you say to someone who isn't? So at least for me, right? If I went, I feel like if I went to high school, it would have been okay. I would have been fine. I would have had my network of friends. I would have done my work. It would be whatever. So I feel like for a lot of people, though, there's this sort of pressure that EAP's supposed to be your tribe. You're supposed to find these people, and you're supposed to be like, oh my god, high school is so bad. EAP is the holy way. Like, what would you recommend to people who are like, you know, high school wouldn't be that bad?
I mean, I definitely I know what you're talking about because I think I had that too. I think, and I'm trying to remember how I came to that to the decision to even do EAP because it seems like something very crazy that I'm trying to remember how 14-year-old me saw that and thought, yes, I should do this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with trying it. And obviously they're in Honors Academy, so they've already gotten to that point.
Yeah.
So I think ideally by the end of Honors Academy, I think you'll probably know which one you want to do. Like, even if they would both be good options, like if they're both good options, then great. You're choosing between two good options. You can't really go wrong. And so then that's just, you know, which one do you want to do? And that's something I would tell them to, you know, talk to if they're comfortable talking with their parents, or you know, find someone who's able to go through that with them. Yeah. And then for the time management thing, I think I would say going back, like if you're not like at a point where you're comfortable, you know, managing your time, or office hours, I think is another big thing that people talk about. And like, yeah, I do regret not going to office hours more when I was in younger years, but at the same time I understand why I didn't. And so I think one piece of advice I would give them would be to, you know, if you're not comfortable going to office hours, like accept that you're not comfortable with that, and you know, don't beat yourself up too much about it, and you know, by the end just be able to, I guess, sympathize or empathize, whichever one it is, with your former self, and understand that, you know, you might not have done as much as you think you should have looking back, but you know, you had reasons back then for not doing that.
Yeah. I think, I know I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I still don't go to office hours, so there's that as well. I'm still,
professor.
I still have that sort of fear of, you know, this could be weird, this could be awkward, so it still exists, and there's still those moments. So, I guess to wrap up from my questions, we finished up at around 3-ish, and so maybe if the 6 diehard audience members have a question they can ask, but so I imagine there'll be people who might watch this interview and go, swimming, violin, shadowing, like, oh my god, and then taking the MCAT and going to med school, all that stuff. What would you recommend to somebody who like sees their friends and goes, why am I not doing that? You know, why am I not that good? Why am I not doing that curricular? Why am I not doing that research? You know, what would you recommend to somebody who looks at the people around them and says, wow, I'm nowhere near their level?
I mean, I think generally we have a tendency to underestimate what we've done, because we don't really see it as that unusual. So I think just try to remember that, you know, the people that you're looking at could be looking at you and thinking, well, why am I not like them? And then also, like, you don't know what it takes necessarily for them to be doing that, and you don't know, what's going on. And so, like, yeah, like, yes, I did all that stuff, but I was spending 15 hours a day at school, 4 days a week. Like,
Yeah.
that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everyone
certainly.
wants that life.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much longer, because that was spring 2020, I don't know how much longer I could have sustained that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know. Everyone compares themselves to other people, but I don't think there's really that much that you can get out of it because you're not them and they're not you.
Yeah, certainly.
But, we're all going to do it anyways.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely agree. I think it's just important to embrace who you are, and embrace what you want. The way I see this is oftentimes like you see the 3 puzzle pieces from that person that you want, and they see the 4 puzzle pieces from you that they want, and it's like you wouldn't trade, right? You wouldn't trade because you love those 4 puzzle pieces, and they love their 3 puzzle pieces. So just stick with what you have,
Yeah, and you see the part of them that they show.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see all of it.
Well, to wrap up, I suppose. Do you have any last thoughts, tidbits, things you want to share? If you have any this is one thing that I want to touch on, but didn't get around to.
Not really. Younger years talk to the older years. I promise we're not scary, but I understand why you think we are.
I might be. I'm very intimidating.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, all right. I think we will have more of these in the future, certainly. But before we, wrap up, does anyone have any questions?